Hi, my name is Lena. Welcome to my channel, and we are talking about Bible. We are talking about Gospel of Mark. It's Sunday read along that Steve Donoghue is hosting, and the objective of this read along to read four Gospels as literature, not as religious texts. And I felt once again. I read it as religious text, and I couldn't help comparing Gospel of Mark to Gospel of Matthew. And I understood better what I didn't like about Gospel of Matthew. So I have already watched 3 videos on the topic. Steve's video of Joseph Francis Burton, and of Shay. Sorry guys, I hope I'm saying it right. So I have to say that I failed to see most of the things they saw reading the Bible, and it's not news to me that I'm very bad at analyzing texts, and I'm hoping that this kind of read-alongs will help me to become better. And Steve was joking that the author of Gospel of Mark was expecting world to end within the living generation. And Steve was joking why he bothered to put this oral tradition on paper if he expected war to end soon. So Steve totally looks at Bible as literature to be read and reread for enjoyment. But I don't think that the author of this gospel looked at it the same way. No matter how soon he expected war to end, he knew perfectly well that God did not expect him to stop preaching, to stop spreading this word, to stop walking this field. So, and I guess at that time they were, as almost all of the people before me said, that at this time there was a serious civil conflict, or Steve said that they were persecuted. It was probably the time of Nero. Sorry. So they were probably scattered, right? And they didn't have this older and wiser man among them, probably. So this gospel, in this case, would be the only reference they had, and we all know what happens to oral tradition from our life. For example, I have a friend who lives in a small town and surrounded by small villages, and a lot of people are relatives and friends and acquaintances. So once she went to a wedding, and she met a young man there. They probably danced once or twice, and he was a security guard at a bank. And when she came home a week later, probably, she found out that she was about to get married to a pilot. So they probably couldn't allow this oral tradition to get out of control. They probably wanted to preserve it. And this Gospel of Mark, it's very short. It probably didn't take long to copy it, and it probably wasn't that difficult to hide it among possessions, and it was always by hand to check something. And so I think it's perfectly normal thing that they put these teachings, this oral tradition, these tales on paper. Steve said that Mark was a very bad storyteller, but I like Gospel of Mark better than Gospel of Matthew. And the tone of narrative was completely different. And I felt that Mark is very sure about himself, is very sure about his audience, and very sure about the subject he writes about. He doesn't feel the need to rely on or to lean on Old Testament that much. Well, I I'm not familiar with Old Testament on a deep enough level. I read at least one comment that said that actually Mark references a lot of Old Testament, but to see it you need to know the verses, and I don't know them, not yet. So, but he doesn't mention the prophecies in every other chapter. So he is completely sure about this New Testament, that it replaces the old one, that we kind of, all we need is the New Testament. And he totally thinks that his audience knows a lot, at least about John the Baptist, because he uses the story of John the Baptist as time reference in telling the story of Christ. And if I could say that Gospel of Matthew can be called a biography of Christ, I don't think that Gospel of Mark is a biography of Christ. It's a story about fulfillment of will of God, about fulfillment the plan of God. And that's why it starts with Jesus, I'm sorry guys, with the baptizing of Jesus. And that's probably why John the Baptist doesn't have this complete chapter to himself, because his part in the story actually kind of ends with the baptizing of Christ, and the different story starts with it. So it starts with the baptizing of Christ, and it ends with resurrection of Christ, with the moment when Christ cannot be found in his body, cannot be found in his grave. So trying to apply some things that I learned from Wilsonn Shugart. I thought that by intuition the author might put the things that are very important to him in the middle of the book, and what we have in the middle of the book is Christ telling his pupils for the first time, I think, that he is going to be betrayed and that he is going to die, is going to be killed, murdered, executed, and that he will come back in 3 days, that he will be resurrected. And God telling to Peter and some other pupils of Christ on a mountain that Jesus is his son, is his beloved son. So I think this gospel is about the fulfillment of the God's plan. So it starts with baptizing of Jesus, anything before this is unraveled to the story, and Mark doesn't write anything about it. So it starts with the baptizing. We are not shown the when the devil tries to seduce Christ. We are not shown these temptations. So then for half of the book we are shown miracles that Christ performs. They are kind of different, technically very different from the miracles performed in Matthew, because we have Christ actually spitting in the eyes of blind people. We have him putting arms on sick people, on blind people, and not getting it right from the first time. I'm not sure about putting the mud. I don't remember that. Well, technically it's a bit different, but we have half of the book Christ performing miracles. Then we have him telling his pupils that he's going to be betrayed, that he is going to be killed, and then he is going to be resurrected. And God tells that Christ is his beloved son, and that's when teaching starts. So we kind of proved with the first part that Christ can teach this word, this good news, this God's will. And it ends with betrayal and crucifixion and resurrection. And although these women that are supposedly didn't say anybody that Christ was resurrected, that he came back, they definitely told somebody, because Mark knows it. It actually was very interesting, and I think it's very worth reading and comparing, and probably doing a bit of research. The miracles and the parables that Mark and Matthew chooses, and for example, this miracle of sending demons, evil spirits into swines, it kind of very short in Matthew and a very long, kind of fleshed out in Mark. So it was for some reason more important to Mark than it was to Matthew, and I have no idea how to judge the character of Christ. He performs miracles. He teaches something. For example, Joseph Francis Burton, he says that Christ in Mark's gospel we have no idea what he teaches. He just teaches. We are never told what he teaches. So it's very difficult to judge the character of Christ. The only thing I know for myself is that Mark didn't want to show human weakness in Christ, because this part when the Christ prays about the cup to pass from him, Mark cannot throw it out because it's a very important part, because this is the part where Christ um, showed us the importance of God's will, that he doesn't want to die, he doesn't want to suffer, but he understands that the importance of fulfilling the God's will. So Mark cannot throw this out of the story. But he doesn't want us to see Christ as a human being with weaknesses, because he was treading the water on the surface of the sea. He was calming seas and calming weather, and he was feeding thousands with several breads and several fishes, and he was um, he was healing people. And at the same time, he prays about this cup. And so Mark, he doesn't elaborate on it. He um, writes down the first prayer, and then he just said, and he did so twice more. And Matthew actually writes everything down. It's in different wordings. So those phrases, they are not identical. They kind of rephrased each and every time. So Matthew wanted us to see Christ as a human being with this one momentary weakness. And what I liked about Mark is that he doesn't need these dramatic bits and pieces about uh, guards being posted at the grave of Christ so that his pupils wouldn't be able to steal his body and say afterwards that all happened exactly as Christ had prophesied. I like it about this gospel. What I did not like in this gospel was exactly what made me resentful in Mark's gospel and made me want to pick at Christ. Um, this miracle, when the part before miracle, when Christ doesn't want to heal a daughter, I think, of pagan woman, and he calls this pagan woman a dog. I don't like this. Well, this my childish idea of Christ, this Christ I pick up from cartoons, he would never do such a thing. He would heal this girl immediately because he was kind. So that was made me resentful, and I couldn't quite put my finger on what made me resentful. This bit of racism. Um, Racism for me, it's not only white and not white. It's one race against other races. So it was the only bit, I think, in Mark. And I try to remember her name, a woman who did, who talked about gospel by of Matthew, and I think her name was Courtney Pickles. And she was actually very happy about the fact, she's a Catholic, and she was very happy about the fact that a woman made Christ change his mind. So this pagan woman, in her opinion, made Christ change his mind and to save everybody, not only Jewish people. I don't know if I agree with your point completely, but it's a very good interpretation. It's a very hopeful interpretation. What made me resentful is that Matthew was constantly telling us that Christ came to save Jewish people first and foremost. And at the same time, both of these Gospels are written in Greek so that they could be more easily spread among people who doesn't speak Hebrew. And this thing about, I don't know, Christ talking to his pupils and saying that there cannot be no hierarchy among them, that they are all equal as his pupils, but Peter still ends up being closest to him. And Matthew, he doesn't want to share his Christ, although it is written in Greek, although this teaching needs to be spread. But Matthew, he prefers to keep the Christ to himself, to the Jewish race. And it made me a bit resentful. All in all, I'm very curious what we are going to see in Gospel by Luke, of Luke. Thank you for watching. Goodbye and happy reading.